First graders, Mr. Askelson here. It is Tuesday, May 5th, 2020. Yesterday on Monday was kind of a no instruction day, but there was an activity on the matrix for you to do, and maybe some of you got to that, maybe some of you didn't, but it has to do with telling time and telling time from an analog clock. Now, we have a couple different kinds of clocks out there. We have a digital clock, which just tells you the number. Maybe you have that on a clock in your room, or maybe there's one on a microwave or on a stove. It just shows the numbers, and you just read the numbers, and it tells you exactly what time it is. The analog clock, though, is a clock like we have at school, the big clock up on the wall. And it's round, it has numbers, there's hands on the clock. And it can be a little harder to tell time with one of those if you're not used to using the analog clock to do most of your time telling. So we're just going to review that really quick today and make sure that we understand how to use an analog clock. And Monday's lesson was to work on student pages 589 through 592. Do as much of it as you can. So an analog clock looks like this. And I know that everyone's familiar with the clock because you see them at school. But like I said, other than school, maybe you don't use an analog clock that much to tell time. So an analog clock is a clock that uses an hour hand and a minute hand and numbers to show the time. So on this clock face, you can see numbers and hands, and from that, you can see the time. Now, what we're going to do today, or what we did on Monday, was showing hours on an analog clock. And if you look closely, and we will on the clock face, there's a lot of different little marks along there. And all you have to really know for today right now is that a unit to measure time, 1 hour equals 60 minutes. So there's 60 little marks on this clock, and 60 marks would equal 1 hour. And the other thing on an analog clock besides numbers is there's hands. The hand on an analog clock tells time to the hour. It is the shorter hand. So there's two hands on here. There's the minute hand, which is the longer one, and there's the hour hand, which is the shorter one. And this one points to the hour. This one tells us the minutes. So here's a clock right here without the numbers on it. It has just the marks on it. And you can see there's a lot of little marks around here. And if I started up here at the top, and that's usually where we start counting on an analog clock, and I was to count every single one of those marks, I would find out that if I went all the way around the clock, there would be 60 of those little marks. And each one of those little marks stands for a minute. Now it gets confusing because some of these little marks also stand for hours. And that's where the long hand or the short hand comes in, because that will tell us what we're looking at and what we're going to count. So if I was just to move this off to the side, now you can see the numbers on here. And you can see we start at 12 o'clock, and then we count the hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and all the way around. There's 12 hours on the face of a clock. So let's take a look at one of these clocks and just see how do they move. So here's an analog clock right here. Here's the hands that point to the minutes, and here's the shorter one that points to the hours. And if I was just looking at this clock right here, I could see if the long hand it points to the top or at the 12, then all I do is count the shorthand, what it's pointing to. And you can see the shorthand is pointing to the 8, and right up here it says 8 o'clock. Now if I was to move that, you can see the little hand moves with the big hand, and it does. So if I had my hands right there, that would be a different time. It's more than just plain 8. And we'll get to that eventually. But for right now, we're just going to keep that top hand right up here at the 12, and we're just going to count where the shorthand is pointing. So I could move that back to here. And if I did that, now what time is it? It's 4 o'clock. And so you can see as I move that large hand, all those minutes. And remember, I said if you started here and went all the way around, that would be 1 hour. So you can see if I go all the way around with that long hand, the small hand moves with it, and the small hand moves between the big numbers. So if I was to move that hand all the way around to there, it would be 7 o'clock. If I was to take it and move it all the way around like this, then it would be 3 o'clock. So long hand pointing to the 12, we count the short hand because this is the hour hand. So let's take a look at some of these clocks. Tell what time is shown, write the time. So if I was to look, first thing I see is my long hand or my minute hand is pointing to 12. And as long as that's up there, I can just point or look at and read the number that the shorthand is pointing to. And this one says 4 o'clock. Over on this one, minute hand is pointing to the 12, so I just read the shorthand and it points to 2 o'clock. So let's see if we're right. Yeah, 4 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Let's try a couple other ones. Tell what time is shown, write the time. Minute hand points to 12, hour hand points to 7. So we could say that it's 7 o'clock. This one's a little trickier. Both hands are pointing to the top or at the 12. Now remember, as long as the long hand, the minute hand, is pointing to 12, then we read the shorter hand and that tells us the hour. So this one, even though they're both pointing at the same number, it would be 12 o'clock. Let's take a look. There we go. Let's do one more. What time is shown? Write the time. Minute hand points to 12. Hour hand points to 5. Hour hand points to, or minute hand points to 12. Hour hand points to 3. Let's check this one. There we go. 5 and 3. So hopefully, first graders, that you can go back and use your clock with the hour hand and the minute hand on an analog clock and answer some of the questions on student pages 589 through 592. Hope you have a good day, first graders. Thanks.